All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I would like to thank everybody for joining us today for our Picky Eaters presentation. March of Dimes is so proud to partner with Nicklaus Children's Hospital for this great event. At March of Dimes, we fight for the health of all moms and babies. Our research, advocacy, support, and education makes such a difference for moms, babies, and healthcare providers everywhere. I invite you to view our website, marchofdimes.org, to learn more. Please, during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A feature if you have questions that you would like to ask. We're going to try to get to all of those, and if we don't get to them, we will send a follow-up email to any of those questions. And then use the chat feature if you just want to make any comments. At this point, I would like to introduce Dr. Saima Aftab, our host for today's panel. Dr. Aftab is a neonatologist and vice president of organizational initiatives at Nicklaus Children's Health System. She is also on the March of Dimes South Florida Board of Directors. So take it away, Dr. Aftab.
Thank you so much, Stacy, for that introduction. I am so excited about this panel discussion today because this is a really important topic. Both as a mother, as a doctor, as a clinician, I've firsthand encountered picky eaters, both in my home, in my practice, and through my career. So we have a great lineup of expert specialists today that are going to talk about picky eaters and hopefully answer some really important questions. So many children struggle through stages of being selective about food. Many of us may have remembered the time where our kids have just been eating the same food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And we often wonder, are they getting enough nutrition? How do we make sure that they stay healthy? And now in this day and age, when we're seeing a lot more childhood obesity, it's really important to start understanding, the importance of having a balanced diet, and also what things can we do as parents to make sure that our kids are getting that. So I'd love to introduce our panel of experts today for our talk from Nicklaus Children's. And first up, we have Grecia Ferreira. Grecia Ferreira is one of our really amazing clinicians. She's a certified lactation consultant from Nicklaus Children's Hospital. She's a registered nurse by training and certified in neonatal ICU care. And she works very closely with our mothers, both in the NICU and through the health system, to support lactation. So she runs lactation support groups, and she is very involved in our staff education, parent education, and provides all our moms great support with lactation. And she does through sharing all her evidence-based practices. So we're very excited to have Grecia on our panel today. Next up, we have Dr. Maria Mila. Dr. Maria Mila is our second panelist. She is a pediatrician by training, and she serves as the section chief of our pediatric care centers at Nicklaus Children's Hospital on our main campus. She did her residency training at Georgetown University Hospital in DC, and she also has a degree in public health from FIU. She's an academic pediatrician, and she's very involved in residency education as well, and she's passionate about early childhood literacy and education. And Dr. Mila is going to help answer a lot of questions that parents are going to have today about picky eaters and the nutritional impact. Next up, we have Cindy Robles-Herde. Cindy is a really, really special person because she is a specialist who really helps understand the mechanics of feeding and how that can be, a barrier for kids to sort of have a nice balanced diet, or for one of the reasons why kids are picky eaters. She has over 16 years of experience in pediatric feeding disorders. She's a true specialist. And through her career, she's worked both in hospital settings and through early intervention programs. And she collaborates very closely with pediatricians, GI specialists, neurologists, nutritionists, lactation consultants, behavioral specialists. And she's fabulous, and she has worked in many large centers and in academic centers through Boston and Chicago as well. So she's definitely, one of the leaders in the space of speech pathology and the importance of sort of the speech mechanics and what things parents can do to make sure they can recognize kids who may have some speech and swallowing related issues that are causing them to be picky eaters. And then last up, we have Liani Perez. Liani Perez is she's a registered dietitian, and she's a licensed dietitian specialized in community programs and health communications. And she works at Nicklaus Children's Hospital. She's a part of our core team, and she's impacted the life of the county area, nutritional resources, and a lot of the community programs that we do, which is sponsored through Coles Care. She works in collaboration with government agencies and also faith-based agencies and schools to host a farmers market and deliver educational workshops. So she's definitely, she walks the walk and she talks the talk, and she's very passionate about, healthy children and healthy nutrition habits. And she is truly one of our experts. So, so to just kickstart us off, I'm going to start with, Grecia. I'm going to ask you, Grecia, you're a lactation consultant and you work with mothers every day and help them kickstart their breastfeeding journey. Can you please tell us why it's so important to instill good habits early on, starting from infancy?
Sure. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We know that an infant's nutrition starts with human milk. And we know also the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that a baby is exclusively breastfed for the initial 6 months after birth. So we should continue breastfeeding even after the 6 months while introducing complementary foods, at least until the child is 12 months or beyond. The AAP does not put a limit on breastfeeding. And when we talk about breastfeeding, we should know that also breastfeeding should be on demand. Nursing should take about 8 to 12 times in a day and based on the infant's hunger cues. Now, when we talk about an infant's nutrition, we also have to talk about the mother's nutrition. Mothers breastfeeding their newborns should eat a regular diet with a variety of foods. And the reason for that is that the more that a mother is exposed to a high variety of foods, the less likely an infant will be later on a picky eater. So that's actually beneficial for the infant later on. The CDC recommends that an additional 450 to 500 more calories is provided to the mother based on her 1,800 to 12,000 calories per day. She should, if she follows the specific diets, like a vegetarian diet, she should definitely follow up with her nutritionist or her physician for adequate supplementation of B12, for instance. Breast milk alone does not provide the infant an adequate amount of vitamin D. So also the AAP recommends that an infant is provided on a daily basis about 400 units of vitamin D, at least in the initial 6 months. Once the baby starts transitioning to solids after 6 months, then they can talk to the physician to make sure that the baby is getting enough vitamin D through the foods or through the solids. Also, a mother should know that certain types of seafoods should be consumed in a limited amount to prevent excess of mercury consumption. We know that mercury can have adverse effects on the brain and the nervous system of the breastfed child. Therefore, it's very important for you to refer to myplate.gov or the FDA's guidelines on fish consumption so that you know what to choose from the good list and how often in a week you should be consuming fish, okay? And mothers that may wish to might also want to restrict caffeine intake. We know that caffeine can make a baby, it makes a baby, it's a stimulant. So it makes a baby jittery, fussy, it increases awake states versus, a regular sleeping pattern on the infant. So make sure that you're limiting your intake to about 2 to 3 cups a day, which is about 300 milligrams of caffeine a day. And if you follow all these guidelines, it would certainly facilitate good habits on your infant from early on.
That's fantastic, Gracia. And I love how you helped share how important it is for moms to start with a balanced diet, because it's the whole household, the whole family unit in terms of what eating habits we can instill from a very early age. And thank you for pointing to some really important resources, myplate.gov and the CDC website as well. And we'll be sharing those resources, through the chat and also through an email afterwards to make sure that all our moms have those resources available so they can plug in both, foods that are advisable for moms that are breastfeeding and also how many calories they need to take, and has really good tips and advice. So just sort of building on that, Gracia, when babies get older and, we're talking about infants that are ready to move to cereals and solid foods, what are your recommendations to mom that are sort of doing a combination of these, these starting to introduce solids and still continuing breastfeeding? How do we make sure that they continue to sort of instill those habits that will set them up for success?
Well, I think that most experts can agree that solid foods should be incorporated at around 6 months of life. And you can begin with single grain cereals and then follow with fruits, vegetables, and in later months, perhaps introduce the proteins. Ultimately, it's an infant's developmental readiness that would determine when to introduce semi-solid foods to the diet, okay, of the child. Now, the mother will notice a change in the infant as the infant eats more solids. Perhaps during those times, you'll see like the baby would not be so frequent in breastfeeding patterns. You should let the baby continue nurse on demand based on his hunger signs. If the baby becomes less interested in breastfeeding after you introduce solids, try breastfeeding first prior to the solids, prior to offering the solids. And as your baby becomes a toddler, a mother might notice that breastfeeding varies, and some might want to breastfeed only at bedtime, sometimes only in the mornings, while others, might breastfeed a lot longer than eating solids. If that occurs, continue to nurse on demand. Remember that a big part of your child's, or the most important part of your child's nutrition, continues to be breast milk. And so even as you transition to solids, so you should continue nursing on demand and continue supplementing with solids as well.
Perfect. Well, switching over to Dr. Maria Mila, as an academic pediatrician and really the medical expert that sees this all the time in your practice, what is a typical age where you start seeing picky eaters?
Good afternoon, everybody. So picky eaters usually start in the toddler years. It's normal for a perfectly, good eater to become picky around 15 to 18 months. They're usually expressing their independence about everything, and this includes food as well. And it usually peaks at about the toddler and the preschool years.
Very good. So typically when parents come to you and ask for advice in terms of introducing foods into their kids' diet as toddlers, do you see, one of the concerns that parents may have is that they don't want to be, introducing foods too early, because now in this day and age, we see a lot of kids with food allergies. What advice do you usually give them in terms of making sure that they feel comfortable, introducing feeds, and sort of how does that work out?
Right. So you want to make sure that they introduce, foods early, but at the same time that the child is safe. Obviously, you don't want any choking hazards or anything like that. However, kids that are on pureed foods for a long period of time then do become more picky eaters. So introducing the solids, early on is actually beneficial.
And when do you start getting concerned that a child's nutrition or their health is starting to fall behind because of their very selective or picky eating habits?
Yes. So we make sure that we follow up patients on a yearly basis for their routine well visits. And at these visits, we always show the parents the growth chart, right? And so the growth chart is a great indicator of a child's general health and well-being. So picky eating becomes a concern when it affects a child's health, growth, and their development, when they are undernourished or when they're obese, right? So picky eating can lead to both of these things. One of the best indicators, like I said, is a growth chart. So it's very important to talk to your pediatrician, make sure your pediatrician shows you the growth chart. Kids before puberty tend to gain approximately about 5 pounds per year and about 2.5 inches. So this is just roughly an estimate so that you know what to expect. So if you notice that your child is not, gaining weight or is not gaining enough weight, it's definitely important to talk to your pediatrician, because then they can fall into a category that we call, failure to thrive, and then that needs further workup and investigation.
Thank you. So the one thing that, while we worry about picky eaters, we're reading both in the news and in medical literature, we're learning that, childhood obesity is becoming an increasing problem. So Dr. Mila, when you see toddlers in your practice and parents, are concerned about them being very selective, how do you make sure that they don't don't lean towards high calorie foods or.
I'm sorry, got a little cut up, so I couldn't hear the end of your question.
So sorry. So what I was asking about was childhood obesity. With selective picky eaters, one of the concerns is that they, may eat a lot more of things that they like to eat, like a lot of mac and cheese or drink a lot of juice or things like that. So how do you, what advice do you give parents in terms of making sure that they can start introducing more healthier food so children don't sort of move towards obesity or become overweight?
Sure. So it's important that parents, like you said earlier, are involved in this as well, right? A lot of times they serve as role models, and so they need to be healthy themselves. They need to show their kids that they themselves eat their fruits and the vegetables, and that they're not picky eaters. It's kind of like you want to make sure if you're telling your child to do something that you're doing it yourself, right? So that's important. The other thing is that we want them to avoid sugary drinks, for example. So things that are not nutritional, juices, sodas, that kind of thing, sweets. So we talk to them a lot about that. We also talk about the importance of, snacking. You want to make sure that your child is not snacking right before a meal, because then they're not going to be hungry. So they're not going to want to sit down and eat. So coming to the table hungry is a good thing. And parents a lot of times are concerned, right, that my child, poor thing, might be feeling hunger, so I want to give him something. So they give him a snack, and then they give him a juice box, or they give him goldfish crackers, and that kind of thing doesn't help a picky eater. So those are some of the things I say. Also establish mealtime routines. Make sure there's no phones or electronics at the table, because that obviously is a big issue, especially nowadays. And family meal times are very important. And then setting limits, just like you would set limits surrounding like bedtime, setting limits with meals is also important. Don't be afraid to say, no, you're not going to have your dessert if you didn't eat your dinner. So you don't get dessert unless you finish your meal. So those are some of the tips that I give my parents regarding that.
Fantastic. So moving on, Cindy, as the speech and language pathologist and the expert in terms of the mechanics of eating, what are some of the signs or signals that you look for that show that there is some component of the mechanics of feeding that's impeding kids from having a more broader balanced diet or making them picky eaters, so to speak?
Hey everybody. The signs and symptoms of something being wrong with feeding kind of differs by age, right? We sometimes see kids very young and sometimes a little bit early in a toddler age or school age year. So depending on that, some of the most common signs and symptoms that we see is extreme fussiness or prolonged or chronic fussiness during meal times, either it's at breast or sometimes at the table with certain food. We see difficulty accepting or digesting different food textures or new foods that are age appropriate. Of course, we don't want to give a child something that's not age appropriate and expect them to eat it well. Coughing, gagging, choking, vomiting on different foods that again are age appropriate, difficulty transitioning to new foods, right? A lot of the times we see that I am stuck on that puree phase and we're trying to introduce some chewables, some hard or proteins or anything like that, and the parents just can't get over that puree phase. Drooling, difficulty latching on the breast or nipple, and not able to just mechanically break down the food, right? Sometimes we hear, oh, my child can't chew or something like that. Only eating certain textures, certain colors of food, and when it starts to affect nutrition and development and growth, and then not gaining weight, losing weight, or gaining too much weight when there's a limited amount of variety in food. It's caused by poor hydration or poor nutrition. So those are usually the typical signs and symptoms we see when it's definitely something wrong with the feeding mechanics in children.
Great. So, just sort of as you were speaking, one of the questions that sort of actually came up through one of our attendees in the chat was for an 18-month-old who takes purees fine, but doesn't seem to care for the texture of crackers or things that, probably more 18-month-olds would be eating, when would that be a cause for concern for you?
So at 18 months old of age, we are already seeing a variety of textures, right? We start introducing solids around 6 months on average. And by 7 or 8 months, we should have a variety of different kinds of food, different kinds of textures, right? So when we're at 18 months old, we are already kind of behind. So I would definitely say that that's one of the red flags when we can transition to different kinds of food. And it could be different things. It could be that, sometimes what we see is I tried, but the child gagged, so I delayed it, and that delay continued to happen. And now we're like so far in that we're not accepting, or there truly could be an issue, mechanical issue or neuromotor issue that is prohibiting the child of feeling safe enough that this food can be digested by mouth.
And to the same effect, and this is, my personal curiosity as well. Do you think, some children take a long time transitioning off the bottle to the sippy cup, or have a pacifier for a very long time? I mean, I've seen 2 or 3 year olds and the 2 or 3 year olds run around with a pacifier. Do you feel that those things delaying sort of the transition off the bottle to the sippy cup, and then phasing out the pacifier could contribute towards kids sort of being a little bit more picky or selective with textures?
Yes. So this is what I tell parents, right? And I've spoken to pediatric dentists extensively about this. If it's a child that is eating fine and is developing fine, I'm not as concerned with the bottle or the pacifier, right? Because clearly it's not causing any problems with the development and how we're eating and how this child is eating. However, we're noticing that, we are still on the bottle at 2 years old, we're still on the pacifier at 2 years old. And not only are we not eating the variety of foods, but also not hearing those sounds that should have been developed at this point, that is a cause for concern. And the other reason why sometimes we see kids who are on the bottle not being excited about eating is because the bottle is easy. It fulfills children. And a lot of times what we see is parents like, okay, we're struggling with my meal times. My child did not eat anything for dinner tonight. I can't let him go to bed hungry. So I'm just going to give him the bottle. So what you're teaching your child at this point is it's okay not to eat your meal, because at the end of the day, you're going to have a bottle. You're going to be satisfied and you're going to get the nutrition, you're going to go to sleep. So we have to understand when to kind of like balance the bottle and actual nutrition at this age. So I do tend to tell parents 2 things. You can either cut cold turkey, deal with it for a few days. It might be a little bit hellish, or you can kind of slowly phase it, right? Pick 1 bottle a day that you're going to phase and switch for an actual me time and kind of work through the day like that. The trick is be consistent. Once you give in to your child's tantrum, they realize that mom's going to give in and I'm going to do it. I'm going to tantrum every time you refuse to give me the bottle. So.
Well, This is really good advice. I wish I had this advice when I had my toddlers. Would have certainly come in handy. So now another question, sort of very much related. So, not giving into tantrum for toddlers, I think that makes perfect sense. But in the chat box, one of the moms has asked a question that she has a 9-year-old who's very picky. And just by looking at the food, she automatically says she doesn't like it, she won't try it. And if you force her to try it, she gags. But, interestingly, she doesn't like meatloaf, but she loves a hamburger. She'll eat ground beef or, meat in a different way. So how do you deal with, preteens, older kids that are picky and actually, are they tell their parents they're gagging, or they may even throw up if they try a texture in their mouth that they don't like? How do you deal with that?
So I feel like this problem happens at 2 years old to 12 years old, right? The question I always ask parents is, are they eating the same? Do you see the same problems with the food if they're eating at home, at a restaurant with grandma, grandpa, or at school? The trick is to define, is it a behavioral problem? Because if at home with mom, I pretend to gag or I really throw up or I, got that all that going, mom's going to back off. But at school, I can't do that because it's not cool around my school age kids to do, my friends to do that. I'm going to eat it. If that's consistent, if we see that it shifts how they eat between scenarios and between places, then we know it's a behavior problem. If it's consistent, if, I'm always having a child is always having a problem, difficulty eating the same food, no matter who they're around and where they are, now we truly see that's a behavior, sensory problem, right? Now, there's a possibility that both of them are together, right? So then definitely we need to see what is causing the sensory problem. And there's definitely really great approaches in our field to kind of help desensitize where we can eat a variety of things. Now, the other question I'll tell parents is, and I then refer to nutrition, a pediatrician, is let's look at the variety of food your child is eating. Is it enough to sustain a healthy growth? If it is, then I'm like, is this truly a battle you want to fight? If they're growing healthy, if they're having enough nutrition, and the pediatrician is not worried about development and they're gaining weight and they're doing well in school, and the nutrition is saying, they're meeting all the nutritional needs. It's going to be a battle. So I always tell parents, you can either wait it out. They might become more adventurous eaters as they grow older, or if it's truly an issue where we're seeing poor nutrition, poor weight gain, poor development, and definitely we need to address this through therapy.
Fantastic. Well, this has been very informative. And I love how you were able to help us understand how it's a true multidisciplinary approach where the pediatrician, like Dr. Amila, in the community are the eyes and ears and work closely with the parents and are able to flag where there's nutritional issues in terms of just the nature and type of foods that are incorporated in the diet, or where there's truly an issue with the mechanics of feeding or sensory issues, and sort of tying it all together. So I think, this was very helpful to me as well. And sort of switching to nutrition a little bit, talking about, the types of food and how do you create a balanced diet for children and healthy eating habits early on. I'm going to move to Liani Perez, who is our very experienced academic registered dietitian and works all the time with healthy children who are picky eaters, as well as children with complex medical needs that have special nutritional requirements. So Liani, can you please help me understand, what are the best practices or advice you give to parents around mealtime? Could you walk us through what mealtime should look like, starting from early age as toddlers and then sort of walking forward as they get older?
Right. So one of the concerns that I noticed from the parents is my child eating enough? When we're talking about picky eaters, that's a concern. Sometimes they eat the same foods over and over again. And one of the parents are always concerned, is my child eating enough fruits? Is my child eating enough vegetables? Is he drinking enough dairy? Those are the main concerns. Of course, the growth chart, it is going to be a great indicator on whether your child is eating enough, because the height and the weight are perfect indicators on whether your child is meeting the nutritional needs. One of the things that of course, having a dietitian calculate the nutritional needs of your child based on the height and weight and age is important. But if you don't have this, you still have other guidelines. The myplate.gov will give you an exact amount of servings that your child should be eating on a daily basis, let's just say, of dairy products. The dairy products, the recommendations are between 2 and 3 servings per day, depending on the age group. For the fruits and vegetables, which is the biggest challenge, the serving size will be 2 servings, and this is for older kids. Little kids will have different serving sizes, and you can find this information on myplate.gov. So the serving sizes for fruits and vegetables will be 2 servings of fruits and 3 servings of vegetables every day. And those are just guidelines, so you have an idea whether your child will be meeting your the nutritional needs. Now, something else that was just mentioned by Cindy is about the same foods. Is your child eating the same foods over and over again? One of the things that we recommend is variety, because in variety comes a complete nutritional intake. Some foods are high in certain vitamins, other foods are high in other minerals, and in the combination of these foods is how we meet our nutritional needs. If you're eating the same foods over and over and over again, there is a chance that there may be a vitamin that these foods are deficient in, and you can develop a vitamin deficiency later in the future. And sometimes these deficiencies are manifested in symptoms that we're not clear. And it's important to have this variety in the meals. And variety is very important. And when I mean variety, perhaps your child does not want to eat more fruits, but it's important to start trying different fruits and different vegetables. And one of the tricks that I always say to the parents is it takes 10 times for someone to like something. Even for adults, it takes 10 times. And a way that you can do this is you can put it on the plate and let the child look at it and see. Let's just say broccoli. Broccoli is a challenging one. I remember my son told me, what is that little tree doing in my plate? When he was little. And now he eats broccoli. But it takes time, it takes an effort. So don't be discouraged if for the first time they do not want to eat a vegetable or something new. Just leave it on the plate, let them look at it, let them touch it, let them smell it, let them taste it, and eventually they will eat it. So you can do that too. And that will encourage them to try new foods.
So many times I've seen, both, at the hospital and then, with my nieces and nephews that are younger, what mealtime looks like for toddlers is, a child put in a high chair with an iPad with like some type of cartoon running, and the child pretty much focused, and the parents sort of using that as a distraction while they're eating. And so what's your take on that? What does mealtime need to look like in terms of for kids to be engaged, to be interested, so it doesn't become a fight or a struggle? What advice do you give parents in terms of how to set up mealtime?
That is a great question, and I thank you very much for that. One of the things that we have been looking at into the obesity, family involvement. We want families to be involved in meal times. And studies have demonstrated when the families interact together at meal times, it creates a better environment for the meal. And there are chances that family will eat healthier foods together. Taking away the distraction, taking away the phone, not picking up the phone when you're eating, even if it is just a friend, leave it alone. You can answer that phone call later. Turn the TV off. Have time for your family. We are living so quickly now that sometimes we don't have time for that little interaction, which is so important. And studies have demonstrated that contributes a lot to obesity later on. One of the things that I want to emphasize is that little habits that you create now when you're little are habits that you're able to sustain as you get older. And one of the things that I have noticed is that picky eaters sometimes grow into picky adults. And those picky adults will not eat fruits and vegetables, they will not eat healthy foods, and they will have a very difficult time managing their weight. So it's important to start now when they're young and create healthy eating habits now, and so they can sustain it later on in life.
Excellent. So, with my kids when they were younger, one of my nemesis was green vegetables. So broccoli and spinach and everything green. And it was such a struggle. So, as an expert, can you give us some tricks or some neat ideas of how we can sneak them into their diet, so to speak, without it being such a struggle? I mean, it's great to sort of, have broccoli sitting on your plate, but are there things that can make it a little bit more appetizing or have it disguised, so they at least start getting it nutritionally as we're moving towards getting them to eat it as a part of their regular meal?
Yes, that is a challenge for everyone. And one of the things that I have noticed is that when you explain a child why it's important for them to eat, let's just say, um, a broccoli or something yellow or orange, if you explain to them why it's important, they most likely eat it. And one of the tricks that I always use, for example, carrots. Carrots are rich in beta carotene. Those are high in vitamin A, and those are things that are good for your eyesight. So this is what I tell them: you want to eat, you want to have good eyesight, eat your carrots or eat your yams. Eat all the orange and yellow fruits and vegetables that will be good for your eyesight. Then I move on to the red fruits and vegetables. Those are good for a healthy heart and a strong heart. And when you put it in those perspective, even when they're little, they understand. And it makes a lot of sense for them to eat a piece of broccoli rather than just eat that because it's good for you. They need more information, and you'd be surprised how willing they are to eat these new fruits and vegetables when you tell them what they're doing inside their bodies. And to make that very simple, I group it down in the three colors. I have the orange and yellow, then I have the reds, then I have the greens, and I explain what are the health benefits of each food group. So it's very easy for the parents to say, oh, let's eat yellow fruits and vegetables today because they're going to be good for your eyesight or your skin. So you have beautiful skin. And that's a trick that has worked very well. Another one is having the kids involved in the kitchen and in the meal preparation. They are more prone to eat what they prepare. Of course, when they're little, it will be very difficult and very challenging. But as they get older, if you get them involved in the kitchen and in the preparation, sometimes grocery shopping will help. They will be more willing to eat the foods that they have purchased and that they have cooked. So those are little tricks that we use.
Fantastic. And, this past year has been a tough year for, our moms and dads, and they've done an amazing and heroic job taking care of our kids. And, it's, spending a lot of time at home with kids and not having the normal sort of things that we do in terms of going to school or being able to go outside and play with your friends sort of has made things a little bit more restrictive. And, parents are constantly looking for creative ways to engage their kids to have healthy habits, whether it's healthy eating habits, healthy sleeping habits, just in terms of, just good routines. The one thing that I often sort of, see is parents and everyone sort of is doing their best they can, but, a lot of times when they're waiting in a waiting room for a doctor's appointment, or they're out doing errands or grocery shopping, and if kids need a snack, the typical thing that we have available, just from vending machines is, chips and cookies and things like that. So what advice do you give parents in terms of what snacks that they can pack that are nutritionally, they're good in nutrition, and also they're easy to carry and inexpensive? And how do moms and dads prepare before they leave the house in case their child or little one needs a snack?
Yes, that's a tricky one. When you are going away and depending on how long you're gonna be out, you need to be mindful of the foods that you're gonna be selecting. You cannot be taking things that can get spoiled during the day, because then you can end up having a different issue. And those things would be like yogurt, cheese. If you take those with you and they're not in the proper temperature, you can end up having something that may not be very healthy. Fruits and vegetables will always be the safest way. You can wash them at home, cut them up, and depending on the age of the child, you can give them finger foods, depending on the size, of course. Those would be the easiest and the most and the healthiest options. Whole wheat crackers will do the work. Juices, let's talk about juices. For juices, we do have recommendations. The juices will fall under fruit servings, and for depending on the age, the serving size will be about 2 servings a day. That would be for a child 4 ounces of juice. 4 ounces of juice, and we're not recommending more than 4 ounces because of the calories and because we prefer them to have the fruit. It will give them the fiber, it will give them more vitamins and minerals, and it will fill them up more. So we would prefer the actual fresh fruit. Besides that, I would stay away from the vending machines. The vending machines are very tricky. There's a lot of sugar, there's a lot of saturated fat, there's a lot of sodium in all those convenience foods. So I will stay with the fresh foods that you can bring from home.
Very good. So this was such a great discussion. I learned so much, and I feel like a lot of the attendees, the parents who are attending our chat today, I'm sure that they're just with the activity of the chat box, it seems like there's a lot of common themes, and there's things that parents are taking away. So I think I'd like to thank all of our panelists, and thank you for your great insights. But I really want to spend some time, trying to answer some of the questions that we're seeing up in the chat. And then, we'll see, whoever wants to take them, I can sort of start with someone if anybody wants to piggyback on. And for those questions that we're not able to answer, we will have them answered by the experts and send them out as an email that, Stacy and Yomira and the March of Dimes team will be able to help us with. And I'm just really, I'm just very energized by this great discussion that's happened today. One of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat, that I think there's a few moms that have shared a very similar question, that if teenagers, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, who have very selective diets, who are eating chicken nuggets and patties and breads and cheeses and grilled cheese, pizza, you name it, like all the fast food, and they will not eat unless they're eating the foods that they have chosen, the very selected few types of foods that they're eating. So, and they would go, they would skip meals and not eat a couple of meals in a row. How do you deal with that? So I'm going to ask Dr. Mila first. I mean, when you hear this question in your practice from your parents, how do you think through that? How do you address it?
So yeah, so that's a pretty common question, and there's different things that, we need to ask. Is this, a behavioral issue? Is it that, they're just wanting to eat it because it's fast, it's on the go, they're with their friends? I also ask parents, like some of our panelists mentioned, do you have meal times together, right? Are you spending time with your kids? Because a lot of times teenagers just don't want to sit down at the table, or they're at a friend's house, or they're, in their car already and, going to sports events or things like that. So I tend to ask that, because that's important. If they continue, I think families that eat together, right, you don't see this problem as much as you do with families that haven't really incorporated that dinner time into their routine. So that's another way to ask if that's going on, to see if that can be one of the problems. A lot of times too, we ask, there are two different scenarios, right? There are the kids that are wanting to stay, thin, and they're trying all kinds of drinks and protein shakes and things like that, and that becomes an issue too, because the parents are concerned about their nutrition, and then the opposite, you have the kids that are obese, that are coming into your office and like you said, wanting just to have the chicken nuggets. And so questions are, who's buying the chicken nuggets, right? Is this something that the parents are having in the refrigerator? If you don't have it in the refrigerator, it's a little bit harder for them to have access to that kind of food. Because at that age, they don't think of the long-term, I guess, effects on their health. They don't think, eating this kind of food now will potentially later on lead to me having high cholesterol, with high triglycerides, diabetes, etc. I think teenagers are a little difficult to deal with because of that same exact thing, because they don't see the effects that it can have on their future health. So talking about those things. Now, what can the parents do? Like I said, it's important not to have those foods around. They need to model the behavior. So if the parents eating, chicken nuggets for lunch, it's very hard to convince the child that they can't have the chicken nuggets as well. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's a little bit of what I tend to ask. What is going on at home? What it is that they're exposed to, and if they are buying these things, please stop buying the soda, please stop buying the chicken nuggets, please stop buying the processed foods. That's usually my recommendation.
And for healthy teenagers who are otherwise, they're active, their growth is appropriate, is it okay for them to on occasion, if they're, they're as a sign of rebellion, they're going to skip dinner. I'm not going to eat this. Should parents worry about that and give in, or should they just
right? You don't want to give them Pediasure just
how
because
important
that
it is
means
to
afraid
their
of Right. So they shouldn't be skipping meals. Like breakfast it's very important, right? So you don't want them to miss breakfast. And a lot of kids wake up, they're in a hurry, they're going to school, they don't want to eat breakfast sometimes at school. And so that's very important. That's something that I get a lot, children that are going to school without having breakfast. And then what happens is that then at lunchtime, these kids are very hungry. And so then they want to eat whatever they see, right? So that creates, it's just a bad habit not to have the breakfast, then lunchtime, and the same thing. A lot of times they won't eat lunch, and then at dinner time, then they're just wanting to eat everything that they see. So routine, breakfast, lunch, dinner, with the snack in between, it's very important for them to have those meals. Eating one meal a day is not healthy. The same thing, I tell them, fasting. A lot of parents now are asking me, oh, my child wants to do this intermittent fasting. Well, this is not something healthy for children that are growing and developing. So it's not something that we recommend.
That's very helpful. So for Liani, one question that is coming up in the chat box is that for older children, like preteens and for teenagers, how important is it for them to drink milk? And what are your recommendations for dairy intake for them?
Great, thank you. Actually, teenagers is one of the population that is the most vulnerable right now. When we're looking at the statistics, we notice that little children, because they're still within the mothers and the parents' eyesight, they tend to eat a little healthier. Now, teenagers are the ones that are having the most difficulty with the weight because they have more autonomy. So they are selecting their foods and they are sometimes choosing not to have the milk or not to have the healthy foods. And yes, they need to have, the studies have demonstrated the importance of drinking milk for all age groups. And one of the things that I always recommend people to drink milk is because of their bone health. Bones are very, very important. And now when they're young, you have an age where you can store all the calcium in your bones. So you don't want to mess with that. It is important for everyone to drink milk before and after when you're an adult and even older adults. It is extremely important. You need the calcium. And that calcium is not negotiable. One of the things that I wanted to mention before we were talking about when Dr. Mila was talking about the foods that are high in sugar and things like that, one of the things that I want to remind people is that some of these foods, these fast foods and high sugar foods, they taste good and they have this little addictive it makes you look for it all the time. And there actually have been studies into this. And it is important to break away from that as much as possible. Don't think of it as, oh, I don't want to eat anything else. Think that you really need to make an effort to try to break away from that, especially the teenagers. Because the teenagers now, they have an allowance, so they can buy their food. And sometimes they work, so they have money. Other things that I have noticed is when they skip meals, they skip breakfast. Sometimes they skip lunch. And when they leave school, they're so hungry that they head straight into the fast food place, which is always the one closest to the school. That's another problem we have as a society. Those are the choices that are available. So parents need to be a little mindful of the choices that they make after school. And other things that I have noticed is that sometimes they have two lunches. They have the lunch at school and then a second lunch when they leave school. And that adds up to their weight. So there's a lot of little things that parents need to be mindful and question the child. What did you eat after school? And look at the choices.
To the same point, Liani, are there websites or resources parents can use for recipes to prepare healthy food that their children could, for, things that they could offer them if they're preparing foods at home?
Yes, myplate.gov is an excellent resource. They actually have a section where they can give you all kind of recipes that you can download. You can create your own personal library and access anytime you want to. And it is also important for teenagers to learn how to cook. This generation that is not cooking at home and relying for their meals on restaurants and other places, we need to break away from that and try to make them more healthy meals at home. We need to encourage that. It's important. And healthy, myplate.gov is an excellent resource. I recommend it.
Fantastic. And we will be sharing that in the chat as well as sending it out in the email. So one last question, and I'll direct that to Cindy, if you don't mind. There's a few moms have posted the question that their, 18-month-old to 2-year-old children are really not taking anything but, either milk or just very, very thinly pureed foods, and not wanting to try anything. And they are concerned that there may be sensory issues at play. Where do they start? How do we get them to get evaluated for that?
So I definitely think, like I mentioned before, if you're over that 1 year, 12-month period of age, we need to see a variety of foods, different ingredients, and different textures, right? So this is a concern where you're not able to do this at home. I think the first step of getting an evaluation is to talk to your pediatrician, like Dr. Mila, right? Explain your concerns, and then through your pediatrician, then you can contact us directly, and then we can set up an appointment to come for the evaluation. And I do want to say, though, that when we're looking at, a lot of parents come into a feeding evaluation thinking sometimes it's a very easy fix. We're going to come in, we're going to tell me how to do solids with my child, and it's going to be the end of it. And unfortunately, feeding is, multifactorial, is very complex. We think of it because it does as nothing really. We don't really think of it because it happens so natural to us, but to some kids it doesn't, and even adults at times, right? It is a lot of things involved, besides just culture, besides our environment, our bodies, our neurological systems, our muscles, and everything. So at times, I tell parents, come with an open mind, be very honest about what you're struggling with, because sometimes parents feel difficulty being very honest about what's going on. And it's sometimes not just the child problem, but it's something, an environmental factor that also plays a role. So talk to your pediatrician. That's the first one. Be very honest and very open with your concerns. If you are looking for a guideline, when to decide if you should approach a pediatrician about it, feedingmatters.org has a very little checkbox that you can click, just simple yes or no questions. And based on that, it will tell you, talk to a pediatrician and get an assessment for your child's feeding. I think that's a really good, simple guideline. It's very straightforward. And it kind of gives you also a way to open a conversation with your pediatrician about your child's feeding concerns.
Well, this is fantastic. And it's certainly, I think it's very helpful to have a resource where parents can actually do that self-assessment questionnaire and see, if there is a cause for concern. And obviously, working very closely with their pediatrician to get that evaluation. And we will be entering the name of that website into the chat as well and sending it out in that email as well. I think we're pressed up against time. This was a fantastic panel. Just such great speakers, truly the experts of, both picky eaters from, a medical standpoint, from starting early with breastfeeding and the importance of recognizing the mechanics of eating and sensory issues or, behavioral issues that can be at play. And then, what things we can do to create a balanced diet for our kids to set them up for a healthy and happy future. I'd like to thank Stacy and the March of Dimes and Yomira for putting together this amazing panel presentation. I certainly enjoyed it. I really, really got a lot out of it myself. And, If there's follow-up topics that you would like, sort of either a part 2 of this or additional topics related to this, where you want to hear from our experts or any other experts, we're more than happy to.
Oh, I think we lost Dr. Saima again, or sorry, Dr. Saima again. So I'll go ahead and
reconvene out the answers to any of the questions. I'm going to hand over to.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. And thank you all, to all of our panelists. You are absolutely amazing. We appreciate you all chatting in and asking your questions. And as we mentioned, we will get those questions back to you. We'll get them out in an email to everyone. If you'd like to learn more about the March of Dimes, please visit our website. And if you'd ever like to volunteer or get involved, you can reach out to us as well. Next slide, please. We'd like to just put a big thank you to our year-round partnership with all of our sponsors. Obviously, thank you so much to Nicklaus Children's Hospital for all of your panelists today and for your participation. We do definitely appreciate that. And thank you to all of our other sponsors. And we'd like to just share with you an event happening tomorrow. It is the Big Latch. So this is an opportunity where people can gather together to breastfeed and offer peer support to each other. This event this year will be virtual, obviously, and I am putting in the chat, oh, not tomorrow, I'm sorry, Saturday. Thank you for that correction. It is on Saturday the 7th, and I just put in the chat the link if you would like to get more information about joining that event. And other than that, we'd like to say again, just thank you so much to everyone for joining. Thank you to you all. We will send out an email with just some of the follow-up materials, some of the websites that we mentioned, and answers to some of the questions that we were not able to get to. So thank you again and have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.